All right, welcome back. Are you tired of being scared off by the food police, constantly demonizing animal fat, meat off the grill? Well, maybe it's time we put some myths to rest. New research making the case for eating more healthy meat and embracing the nutritional power of animal fat. Let's tuck in to this conversation. Pam Killeen is an author and health coach with a focus on educating people about improving their sleep quality. She's the host of the Circadian Reboot with Pam Killeen podcast. Pam, welcome back. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Hearing so much these days about the carnivore diet, Dr. Jordan Peterson, of course, advocating for it. There's some very popular people on YouTube. I think that's Dr. Anthony Chafee talking about the carnivore diet. Now, let's just be precise here. What are you talking about? Are you talking about a carnivore diet or just consuming animal fats in general, which would include dairy and eggs and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm probably more of a generalist. I have always advocated that people return to eating 3 square meals a day, because when we ate 3 square meals a day, we were actually the healthiest we've probably ever been. This takes us to about World War II. So before World War II, we sat down and ate a robust meal of bacon and eggs, for example, at breakfast, and we all came home, a lot of us came home for lunch, sat around the dinner table and had a healthy, robust lunch, and the same thing for dinner. And our fast new world has changed everything, unfortunately. But when you look at those meals, especially if you look at dinner, for example, you had your piece of meat, maybe some potatoes and some vegetables, other vegetables with it. You certainly used lots of butter, perhaps even some homemade gravy. So we were not fat phobic in those days. And statistically speaking, we were much, much healthier then as we are now. And we didn't have the obesity crisis. So here we were back before World War II eating lots and lots of animal fat and really didn't have an obesity epidemic like we see today. On top of that, basically the terrible rates of chronic disease in general. So,
right.
I like the generalist viewpoint myself.
I'm sure you've seen all these photos on social media people will take at the beach from the 1970s, and nobody's obese. Everybody is fit and trim. And you contrast that today, and we know what the situation is. How did this happen? Does it have to do with, the food pyramid that Health Canada is constantly, throwing in our face? Did they get it wrong?
Oh, absolutely. They got it completely upside down. So essentially, the food pyramid is influenced by lobbyists. And let me try and break it down to you in really, really distilled ways. You have plant-based foods that are easier to produce, easier to ship, have better shelf life, and are more profitable than animal foods. And over 100 years ago, they figured out how to do the hydrogenation process. And so right there and then, over 100 years ago, you see the displacing nature of moving, shortening into the food supply. And to do that, they had to demonize butter. So they came up with very sophisticated propaganda to say, butter is bad for you. And if you're a housewife in the 1920s or what have you, you're more sophisticated, you're more modern if you're using things like Crisco, the shortening. And so, now when you fast forward to today, you see seed oils being used. They're liquid seed oils, or you still see the use of shortening. And it's these seed oils in general that have caused this rate of chronic disease that we see today. It's not the butter and it's not the tallow, it's not the lard, it's not those fats that have caused the problem, because we had reduced them dramatically. Hopefully we're starting to see an upswing because people are starting to learn that we've been duped as a society and that the government and the food pyramid are absolutely, completely wrong.
Some of the carnivore diet advocates or just animal fat activists, if I can use that term. And I'm not sure if Dr. Anthony Chafee has mentioned this, but he talks about, this idea that cholesterol is behind heart disease. And so we're constantly at war with cholesterol, and we're taking statins. Now everybody's on statins. Like, it's ridiculous. Meanwhile, our brains are made out of, I think they're 20% cholesterol. And we see now Alzheimer's and dementia, like at epidemic levels. Did they get it wrong about that too, cholesterol and the link? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So dietary cholesterol was not the culprit. It has a lot to do with other things that are going on in the body. For those who have high cholesterol in general, if you look at the research, people with high cholesterol actually live longer than people with low cholesterol. So, yeah, we've been duped in that department as well. And just look at the side effects, Richard. I'm sure you talk to people all the time who talk about the side effects of the statin drugs with the memory loss and the stiff muscles. It's devastating what can happen with people when they're on these statin drugs. And I'm not trying to oversimplify something because, as you know, I'm a big fan of going out into the sun and getting fresh air. So we have to embrace that as well as part of a healthy lifestyle. But this wrongful demonization of animal fat and cholesterol has really led to this chronic illness epidemic that we see today. We're detaching ourselves so much from Mother Nature, from our heritage. If I look at my diets, the diets of my ancestors, right? I'm Irish and Scottish and probably some English in there as well. So essentially Northern European. I mean, 100 years ago, nobody would have been afraid of eating animal fat or cholesterol. Nobody. And yet they were really, really healthy. If you look at the English diet alone, back 100 years ago, who conquered the planet? It was the English. They went around in their navies and they conquered the planet. How could they have done that if they were on a low-fat diet? They wouldn't have had the strength. And so we have to return to eating our ancestral ways, whether it looks like a carnivore diet or ketogenic. Some people like the ketogenic diet. But whatever you're putting on your plate, it should look very similar to the diet that your ancestors would have eaten.
And what advice would you give to someone looking to transition to a diet that includes more animal fats?
Well, certainly it would be good to eat things like bacon and eggs for breakfast, or sausage and eggs, something like that. It depends on how many meals you're eating in a day, but if you're having lunch, you could certainly have a sandwich. You could use sourdough bread, which is a more traditional food than your more commercial breads. And you could have a chicken sandwich. You could have a turkey sandwich. And hopefully you've made that from a roast on Sunday night, and you can slice the pieces of meat and eat that over the course of the week as in the form of a sandwich. There's nothing wrong with that. And then at dinner you could have a steak and potatoes and some vegetables. I think that's a pretty sound way to eat. Again, we're mimicking the diets of people that were healthy. That's the way we would have eaten before World War II, and we know for a fact that we were much, much healthier then than we are now. And I don't mean just physically, I also mean mentally.
Right. Very quickly, do you think we're consuming too many grains? Not grains per se, but the way that they're being refined into flour.
Well, I mean, that's a whole loaded topic. Maybe we can talk about that another day. But
Absolutely.
The problem with grains is you start displacing one grain for another grain, or taking the grains away and you replace it with something that's allegedly healthier, and it's not healthier. So you have to be careful with the grain phobia in a sense as well. I do know that there is a problem with grains, but you have to be careful when you start moving them out of your diet. And what if you're replacing it with something that's even more toxic to the digestive system, for example?
As you say, we'll pick up on that another time. Pam Killeen, author, health coach, PamKilleen.com. I'll put a link in the episode notes for the podcast tonight. How do we listen to the Circadian Reboot with Pam Killeen podcast?
I'm on Spotify. I'm on all the platforms, YouTube, Rumble, Apple. So it's called the Circadian Reboot with Pam Killeen, and I've got several interviews up there right now.
Fantastic. Great work. Thank you, Pam. Talk next week.
Thanks, Richard.